go. There we go. I felt so bad. Daniel asked me to tell him something about myself. And as a Swede, I think it's harder to brag or do anything. It's easy to come up with a karaoke song on the spot. So you did great. Thank you so much for the great introduction. How are we all feeling? Yeah, ready for another talk? 35 minutes of slides. We're going to mix in some dollar signs here, so it's probably going to be fine. So, hi everyone, my name is Daniel. I'm here to talk about how to distribute and monetize closed source SDK with the Swift Package Manager. That's a long title, not for future self. So, quick raise of hands before we begin. The Swift Package Manager, how many of you know what that is? Great, not all hands are not up, that's good. How many of you have used it to pull in dependencies into your own apps? Okay, great. How many of you have used it to create a package of your own? Oh, nice. I'm really happy that not everyone knows about the Swift Package Manager, because otherwise this slide would have been totally useless. The Swift Package Manager is a dependency manager that was released by Apple in 2015. But it wasn't until 4 years later when we could start using it in our own applications. And it wasn't until the year after that when we could start using it to bundle up resources, localize strings, images, stuff like that. And I think this was the year when it became a serious contender to other technologies that we still love. CocoaPods, love it. Carthage, it's good. I would say today, it's feature complete. We can use it to modularize our apps. We can use it to create open source and closed source. But then you may ask, like, yeah, we know that already. Why are you here? Yeah, why am I here? Why am I here on stage talking to you about the Swift Package Manager? Well, first of all, I love it. I think it's like an amazing technology that Apple created for us. I use it on a daily basis in many, many projects, and I've also used it to create commercial closed source software. Well, one commercial closed source software. But you know, it's just great. But to really understand my excitement for the Swift Package Manager, we have to go back in time to Stockholm, Sweden in 2020. Quick raise of hands, who knows Sweden? Know anything about Sweden? Okay. It's a land full of Vikings, at least once upon a time. It's a land full of Abbas, and it's a land of IKEA, meatballs, and some global success stories like Spotify, Klarna, Minecraft, and this guy. So I think this is a little bit older than 2020, but humor me here. So this guy doesn't really know it yet in 2020, but his life is about to change. So Daniel was working day by day, 9 to 5, at this beautiful office building in Stockholm, Sweden, building an app called BookBeat, an audiobook subscription app, best of its kind, I would dare say. I was working as iOS lead, doing important work by my computer, also mobile architect. But suddenly, the inbox made a little ding. A new email lands. And you know the excitement you have when you have a new email to read? You lean forward with excitement, opening every email like it's a treasure. And I had an email that said, "You made a sale." So, a few weeks before this, I just published my first closed source SDK with a commercial plan. And now someone bought it, a year-long license for $100. How about that? So any serious businessman looks at me like, yeah, we're here to talk about money. $100? Are you kidding me? But you know, that first sale of $100 felt like $1 million to me. This was the first time that I had commercialized software, except selling a few apps on the App Store here and there. So if we fast forward 5 years, this initial sale ended up with me quitting my day job. And I actually had to learn because I started my own company, to make deals and to actually talk about prices. If someone asked me, how much does this cost? I just didn't run and hide behind the nearest bush, right? I also got to work with people and companies from all over the world, meeting amazing people everywhere. The world is amazing. And I also managed to eventually craft a monetization strategy that allowed me to earn money while I was sleeping, and also to earn enough money to sustain me and my wife and kids, luckily. And then something happened. A science team in Chicago reached out to me and told me that my software, which is a keyboard SDK for creating custom keyboards, they were actually using it to detect bipolar tendencies in their study subject. So they could actually determine by the way people were typing if the person was entering a bipolar episode. And this software of theirs may, if 2025 continues to prove good, may be shot out into space, which means that I will have interstellar software starting with an initial sale of $100. I mean, come on, that's amazing. Yet to be proven, though. But my indie journey didn't start there. So my indie dreams started with developing apps for the iOS framework. So moving from backend and web and .NET and stuff to iOS and the promised land of App Store monetization. I started making apps at home and at work. And as the apps grew in complexity, I started extracting software, extracting features into reusable libraries. I enjoyed that so much. Eventually led me to create more and more open source software. And I currently juggle 20 plus open source active projects with great difficulty. But one of these proved to be needed. So this is an SDK, an open source SDK that I created called Keyboard Kit, the space software, if you want to call it that. I'd be all for that. This proved to solve a very hard problem in a way that people seemed to need. So people started reaching out to me with feature requests, and a person actually gave me a feature that I didn't know how to implement. A very nice guy from Miami called Jim. Hi, Jim, if you're watching this, hi. He told me, I can give it to you, but you have to add it as a closed source commercial feature. And I was like, shouldn't everything be free in this world? He said, no, I give it to you if you make it closed source. So I did. I created my first closed source software called Keyboard Kit Pro, which is an extension. While doing that and learning stuff, I created a license engine, which is also a product of its own, and I'm working on many experiments. So far, I have one product that sells, but it sells well enough so that I can stand here and talk about being an independent indie developer. So that's pretty good. But regardless now if I build apps, open source or closed source, the Swift package manager is right there at the heart of things. And it doesn't matter if you build, you can use it too. If you have something that you want to bring to the world, you can just put it in a box and ship it. If you want to build open source, that's amazing. You can help the community, and the community can help you in turn. But if the thing inside the box may have some commercial value, or if it's something that you want to protect, you may want to consider going closed source. Regardless of if you go open source or closed source, it's really important to have a good system design in place, because the system architecture and the code that you write is the UX of your SDK. And you should also consider covering as much as you can with documentation, especially if you do closed source, because people will not be able to look at the source code and draw their own conclusions. You should cover as much as you can with tests, automate as much as possible so that you can focus on the fun stuff, building features. Versioning is really important, and eventually, if you do all of this correctly, you can probably monetize this. If you do, it's a good thing. If you didn't make it open source in the first place like I did, that's not good. So all of these boxes are 30 minutes talks in itself. I'm going to focus on closed source and monetization. We're going to start by looking at how to build a closed source package. And I'm actually terrified now. I'm looking at my screen. It says that I've been talking for 27 minutes. Is that true? Can that be true? We need to work on this. I'm sorry if I did. Closed source packages. If you work on an open source package, you just need one GitHub repository, and that's it. But with closed source, you actually need two. You need one private source code repository where you keep all the things that should be secret, and one public package distribution repository for the distribution. So it's a little bit more complicated than open source, but not much. We're going to walk through how to create your private repository. So a private repository is going to contain a regular Swift package. So we're going to see how we build that in just a second. The regular Swift package can contain source code, doc.c, assets, etc. And if you have access to the private repository, you can add it with your SSH key, and then it's just going to work like an open source project. But this is going to be imported with source code, and that is something you do not want to give to people. So what you need to do, if you want to create this package, is to start with defining which version to cover. You can give it a name, that's a good thing. Determine which platforms to support. And an open source package can have dependencies. In this case, we're going to use an emoji kit, one of my open source packages called emoji kit, from up to next major version from 1.6 and up. Then we can define targets. In this case, we're going to have a main target called my package with a dependency to that open source package. And then we're going to have a test target with dependency to the main target. And then regular packages can have resources. If you want to add resources, you also need to specify default localization. Then we can wrap it up by defining a product, in this case just a single library with a single target, and we are done. If you add this to your project, you're going to see that it's added with the emoji kit dependency, added, great, and my package version with all the source code. So this is not good if you want to ship it to users. Instead, we're going to take a look at how to create a public distribution repository. This is going to be something called a binary Swift package. This is going to link to a pre-built XC framework. It can also host doc.c, web documentation, and it's going to be imported without source code. So this is something that you can ship as a product. We start in the same way. We define a Swift version. We define the package and the product. But instead of a regular target, we're going to have something called a binary target. So this looks a bit different. This is actually a XC framework that we have zipped up, and Xcode requires us to also define a checksum for this. So how do we build this? It's actually quite easy. We're going to build an XC archive for every platform that we want to support. We're going to create an XC framework from these archives. We're going to generate a zip file and calculate this checksum. And then we can also build other deliverables like doc.c. So looking at that, we start by calling Xcode build with the archive command. It says 24 minutes ago. OK, so my timer is probably out. I didn't know what happened. I was like, I only have 2 minutes to go, and I didn't. That's good. Thank you so much. So to build an XC archive, we run Xcode build archive with a scheme, a configuration, preferably release, and a destination, and an archive path, and some additional flags. This looks kind of scary, but it's kind of straightforward. You do this once for every platform. So if you want to support iOS, the iOS simulator, etc., you need to do it once per platform. Then you generate an XC framework with the Xcode build create XC framework command. You add a framework line for every archive that we generated. And then we repeat that for each platform. Then we define where we want this XC framework to end up. We generate a zip file with the zip-r command. And then finally, we compute the checksum with Swift package compute checksum. And that's basically it. There's not, we don't know. Yeah, so this is not difficult, but to me, what was really difficult was finding the information. How do I do this? I had to figure things out. I think that Apple could perhaps have a little bit more guidance, I don't know. If we want to build doc.c documentation for a closed source package, it's a bit more complicated because doc.c lives together with the source code. The public distribution packet cannot automate building this documentation because the source code is going to be detached from the deliverable. So we need to build it manually. Perhaps there is some good integration way that is more complicated, but this is how I do it. I have a build script file where I inject the target and the platforms that I want to build for. This can take time, so if I just need the iOS documentation, then that's all good. I just build it for iOS. You call the Xcode build doc build command with a scheme, derived data path, and all of that. And then you transform it to be hosted for the web. So this command, xc run in parentheses, find docc process archive, eventually you perhaps find some blog post that shows you this. Otherwise, it's impossible to understand how to do this. You transform it for web documentation. The root HTML file is going to be blank. It's going to be white. There's not going to be any documentation there. So what you can do is to inject a redirect script into the root index HTML file. That's going to redirect users to the correct place. And then we're done. So once again, not complicated. What is complicated is finding the information. So if we run this build script, we get a result. We now have a build folder with stuff. We have a KeyboardKit Pro zip file, and we have a folder with web documentation for iOS. So how do we release this? Well, first of all, we need to upload the zip to a public location. We need to publish docc to a public web server. So I use GitHub for both of these. GitHub GitHub Pages is great for hosting documentation, and GitHub release tags are great for hosting static big files. Then we need to update the package file that we saw with the new URL and checksum, and then create release tags, and then we're going to be done. So eventually, we're going to end up with this nice repository, which contains no source code. Okay, and we're going to have a version, and this is really small, so I did this magnifying effect. So we have a new version, and since KeyboardKit is both open source and closed source, I'm going to release the open source version first, this one. Then I can attach the zip file to the open source version. If you only have a closed source repository, then you can just create a pre-release tag and upload the zip file to that one. That's good. We have web documentation on GitHub Pages. That's amazing. And then finally, if you pull in this package into an app in Xcode, we pull in KeyboardKit Pro without any source code, and I can still have the opportunity to make money and feed my family. So that's amazing. We didn't expose anything. Nice. So now we have this. It's amazing. How do we now convert this to money? How do we convert our hard-earned work into dollars? Yeah, how do we do that? That's a big question. I struggled with this for so long. I had to figure out everything myself. With help from the community, I get great assistance, but I wish there were like Earn Money for Dummies book that you could read. That would have simplified things. What we're going to look at with monetization is how to use licenses to restrict access to the SDK. Because if we just build this closed source binary with no protections inside, people can just take this closed source library and use it. That's not making money. So we need to protect the content of the package in some way. We can also look at how to offer different license tiers and different payment alternatives. And then we're going to figure out the perfect price, hopefully. And then we're going to look at how to offer custom licenses for special needs. So when I started off, people emailed me and said, hey, Daniel, it seems like you have a product. Do you mind selling that? And I was like, yeah, I guess I can do that. Sent them an invoice, and they sent me money, and then it was time to deliver. And as being a programmer, like I built everything myself with source code. So I wrote code that I compiled into the binary, which means that every time someone wanted to buy this thing, I was hoping for 1 or 2 sales, but eventually I realized that every time someone buys this, I need to release a new version of my SDK. I need to write code. I need to run the build scripts. This didn't scale, so I started looking into some kind of payment provider to help me out. I'm just one man, guy, boy, I don't know what I am. So I chose a platform called Gumroad, which is a merchant of record. We're going to look at that soon. So my idea is that the user can go somewhere else and buy. I can just put some prices up on a website. They can click OK, buy. And they're going to get a unique license key for their purchase that they can pass into my package. The package can perform web checks for the license, and if it's successful, I unlock the SDK for them. But the payment provider approach requires an internet connection, which for a keyboard extension, for many reasons, is not optimal. So I had big grossing companies that wanted on-device validation. So I still needed the source code approach, but I didn't want all the manual work that came with it. So I still wrote code, but then I looked into using CryptoKit to create cryptographic license files that I could then just send to my customers, and they add it to their apps, and that file is used to unlock the license. So this means that I still have the flexibility of writing source code, which I love, but I don't have to release versions, which I don't love. There's more fun things to do than to release new versions. So with this in place, I could just release versions when I felt like it, and I could provide users with new licenses without releases. Cool. So how do my customers register a license? If you go in an app that has some purchase stuff, you perhaps have a purchase screen, you tap a button, and you give Apple 30% or 15%. In an SDK, you need to provide some kind of entry point for that. So I let users create this configuration object, and they can add their license key to it. Then in the main application, which is SwiftUI, I have this root file that takes this configuration object. So they can just pass it in there. The view is going to perform this asynchronous license validation and unlock the SDK. Inside the keyboard extension, we're still in UIKit land. So that is a controller, so I need to have a different option for that. But the basic validation is correct. So with this license registered, we can do a lot of validation on device. So we can, for instance, check for the bundle. Can this license be used with this product? Has this license expired? Can this license be used on iOS? Or this let me, model my license offering in different ways. And we also have tiers and features. So with this in place, we can now use the Swift language to protect our SDK in really nice ways. So we can actually use Swift to make it impossible to use features that you don't have access to. So if you consider that you send in this license key, let me go back. You send in your license key and you get this license back. This defines, the name of the app, a customer, a tier, activation and expiration dates, bundle IDs, and features. What we can then do is to craft a feature offering for our SDK. So I have a protocol called license feature. It can be implemented in many ways. These are just a few of the KeyboardKit Pro features. So we have autocomplete, dictation, emoji keyboard, word protection, and more. The emoji keyboard requires a gold, either that the feature is added to the license or that you have a gold license. So what we can then do is that the emoji keyboard view is created with a throwing initializer. And inside the initializer, we actually check, we validate the license for this feature. And if the feature fails, then we throw an error and the view is not created in the first place. So if we go back to the license that we had, you can see that this is a license with just one feature. So this doesn't validate, but since it's a gold feature, it does. So now we can use the emoji keyboard. So the green circle around tiers. License tiers, I'm sure most of you are familiar with that from the good old SAS browsing days. You basically have a table of features, check marks and boxes, and you have different steps to unlock. So a license tier allows you to offer different value levels to your customers. So it lets you target different audiences, which is really important if your SDK offers a lot of features, and perhaps some users cannot pay for everything, so they perhaps just want a subset of the features. You can also use tiers to offer extended support, extended SLAs, etc. So it doesn't have to be connected to code or features. So this is the KeyboardKit, the beautiful tier. I'm not a web designer. This is the best I could do. So you can see KeyboardKit has a basic tier, silver tier, and a gold tier. And then, the checkboxes just keep growing the more people pay. It's wonderful. But in code, a license tier basically just converts to a number. So the basic tier is 1, the silver tier is 2, the gold tier is 3. You can call it whatever you want. You should pick a name that resonates with your potential customers. So you can call it small, medium, large, depending on how much they can use it, right? It's to talk volume. You can use indie, business, enterprise to target different audiences. You can call it uno, dos, tres if you feel adventurous to communicate in Spanish. But the good thing is that now you can use these tiers together with a good payment alternative to let people pay. So, I started with invoices. It's really nice. They emailed me. I sent them an invoice. I typed it on my typewriter and sent it to them. They paid me. A lot of manual work, but it was personal. We had a connection. But some people may want to set up a Stripe server or something. I don't even know if you set up a Stripe server. I've never used Stripe. The only thing I know about Stripe is that you're supposed to handle global taxation. So if you sell a license in the US, you sell a license in Brazil, you need to go to IRS and tell, hey, I earned $20 today. Like, I don't want to do that. I want the Apple experience. I want someone to sell my software and give me some money and keep some money for themselves for the help, right? So then you can use something called a merchant of record. A merchant of record handles global taxations. Can come to a high cost, high provision. So there are a couple of them. I use a service called Gumroad. They started with a 9% take rate that was then progressively lowered the more you sold. So you could drop all the way to 2%. That's a good deal for global taxation management. Then a year after I signed on, they flattened it to 10%, so lucky me. You also have Lemon Squeeze and Paddle. They sit at 5% each. And there's a new player in town. Just announced from Stripe, which owns Lemon Squeeze, so this is a little bit strange. Stripe just announced something called Stripe Managed Payments. So this is a merchant of record built into the Stripe dashboard. So it's going to be in private preview this summer, so I think you should check it out. And regarding pricing, I'm really stressing out because I cannot correlate the time with this timer that is off. I'm fine, perfect. Then I'm gonna just, 1 second. Okay, we're good. So pricing, let's find the perfect price. What is the perfect price for software? That's a great start, at least. Pricing is subjective. My wife told me, like, if you're gonna put this in your presentation, people are going to like, what is this guy doing up on stage? Does he know anything? My intention with this is that you don't really know. Perhaps if you are a serious businessman, you actually do know. It's like, yeah, we're going to like have a consumption-based license, and based on the consumption rate, we're just going to add a margin on top of that, and that's going to be good. Like, I'm not that kind of guy, I code, I do not count. So, but there are some factors that I've learned. First of all, what does your product do? How much value does it bring to an organization who wants to buy it? For me, I spent 8 years building keyboard SDKs. That's insane. Like, I could have learned so much more. I could have learned AI, right? Now I just use it like a monkey. Okay, so I spent 8 years doing this. If a company would mimic or replicate what I built for the closed source, supporting 73 languages, right to left locales, a bunch of features, a bunch of pain and tears and sadness. The company would probably go bankrupt because of internal conflicts, right? But they would also need a substantial amount of time to implement this. So it's easier to pay me. But there also has to be a demand. So the market demand, what if you build the greatest tool that no one needs? Should you sell it for less? Or should you sell it for really, really high because it's a niche product? I went with really high, and I'm happy that I did. Because the ones who need my product, they really need it. And there's probably not going to be that much competition for it. You also have to consider the customer demographic. What if you build the best SDK for students learning Swift, and then you realize that all your customers are students without money? Then you probably need to go lower in price and try to reach more people. And then finally, the two last factors, competition and alternatives. I tried to create a closed source emoji SDK. It was great. It had emoji versions. It could filter out emojis that weren't supported. I released it with an ambitious price plan because I learned that that works from the keyboard days. But turns out there's a bunch of open source emoji SDK. So why would they pay me for it? Okay, cool. Time to wrap up. I just want to end you with one last finding. Custom licenses. Basically, it's really important to offer companies, especially companies that are willing to pay more, offer them a way to customize the license offering. So what you can do is to let them customize anything, almost. You can let them customize the terms and conditions. So a really common way is to have standard terms and conditions that allow you to market, for instance. Like if someone buys your product, you can put their logotype on your website. That's perhaps something that some companies want to pay to avoid. You can let them customize the entire license agreement, and then you can spend time dealing with their entire legal team, like I've done in some situation. That's stressful, but it's also a good learning experience. You can let them pay for additional payment support, like perhaps they need purchase orders. I don't know what that is. It's a number that you put on the invoice, and that's good. But anything that doesn't fit the standard model, do more manual work and charge them more. My custom licenses starts at double the amount of the highest listing price. And for enterprise licenses, the final point, the holy grail of licenses, having someone pay for an enterprise license, then the sky's the limit. As long as they need your software enough, right? So I had to figure out a way to offer a proper enterprise offering. To big companies that approach me and want a serious business partner, you need to be serious. Not as goofy as I am now on stage. You need to be serious. So one thing that I realized that many companies need when they reach a certain scale is predictability and insurance, right? So that led me into the black hole that is software escrow. Have you heard of it? No. Great. You want to? No, okay. Great. So for those of you who do not know, let's play a game. You're an SDK vendor. You sell stuff on the internet, and someone wants to buy it. And they buy it from you, and they buy it good, and they take your package, and they shove it into their product, and they base their entire business on your SDK. Then suddenly you don't feel like it anymore. Perhaps your company goes out of business or something worse happens. We're not going to go into that. What happens to your customer if you disappear? The answer is software escrow. You basically involve a third party, an escrow agent, that's going to serve as a legal partner. This agent is going to send out an agreement, a 3-part agreement to you and your customer. You're all going to sign and shake hands, and after that, hopefully, you will have enough courage to send them your private source code. So you're going to take your source code and deposit them to this escrow agent on a regular basis. And if your business stops serving your customer, the customer can reach out to the escrow agent and say, seems Danny is not around anymore. And the escrow agent can send the source code to this customer. And that is good enterprise features right there. Okay, I've talked for, I don't know, it says 52 minutes. I hope I didn't. But to wrap up, closed source software is really fun. Open source is really fun. They're fun in different ways. Open source is good because you can work with people and learn stuff and help each other out. Closed source is fun because you make money out of it if you do it properly. So it's not always straightforward, but it can be very rewarding both professionally and financially. So whether you want to be the next revenue cat, the next Realm database, or if you just want to extract some feature from your app that can help others and earn money doing so, I hope that you take the steps so that perhaps one day, we can meet in space and share stories about that first sale of $100. Thank you so much for listening. This was scary, but very fun. Thank you.